The legislation committee will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy,
Here.
Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard. Here. Alderwoman Hubbard,
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Ogilvy,
Here.
Alderwoman Navarro,
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook, Alderman Vaquero. Have 5 present.
We have a quorum?
Yes, you have a quorum.
Okay.
Alderman Boyd.
I apologize for being a little late. Alderman Coatar has agreed to speak extra quickly.
I have.
As we go through this. So we have 4 bills before us, all dealing with, I think, related election subject matter. We'll take up Core Bill 144 first, but if you would, maybe just describe the scope of all the bills, and then we go into the details of each one.
Happily, and I thank you, Vice Chairman, for accommodating this Friday morning hearing request and for the members for being here. I'll speak sort of about each bill. Actually, Gary Stoff, Republican Director, is here. Gary, if you want to come on up in case there's questions that I can't handle. There's 4 bills here, all dealing with little tweaks to the election code, which is Chapter 2, 2.08 under the city code. None of these would have any impact on the election that's, next week. This is all trying to get some cleanups done in advance of the municipal elections. So I'll talk very briefly about each of them. 144 has to do with filing fees, not changing any amounts or anything, really just codifying what is already practice, which is anyone who's filed for office, which you obviously all have done, you write a check for 1% of the salary for that office payable to the central committee for the party you're filing. Now, this is just saying that you can take that check and give it to the election board, and then they'll give it to the party central committee. There's been some confusion in the past where people are trying to track down the central committee treasurers in advance to get them payment before they go down and file. You can just bring your check to the election board, give it to them, they'll give it. That's what most of us have done. There was some confusion over that, particularly in the last election. So we're just codifying that.
And that's also consistent with how it's done under state law for the county offices.
Yep. Next bill, 145, has to do with how candidates appear on the sample ballot. So, and you all know when you file on the first day, there's a lottery. If you file on the first day, if you show up on the last day, you'll likely be at the end. This city code requires the sample ballot to list candidates alphabetically. So we're going to change that to make it consistent with how the candidates will appear on the ballot, which I think makes more sense. Yeah, well, so the lottery sort of determines ballot position if you file on day 1.
Right.
But then when they put out their sample ballot, they list the candidates in alphabetical order because that's what city code requires. Currently, we're changing that, so the sample ballot will just reflect how people will see the names on the real ballot.
So, may I ask?
Let's just,
wait.
let's
Okay,
cruise
I'll
through
wait.
and then we'll go
All right.
questions one at a time on.
146, for which I have a committee sub, that's one minor tweak, I'll hand the committee sub around. 146 simply clarifies the 2% threshold for nonpartisan or independent candidates. As written in the city code, it's not entirely clear 2% of what. If you're running for citywide office, it's 2% of all registered voters. You need signatures from them to get on the ballot as an independent. But that's not clear. It's actually been the subject of some lawsuits for if you're running for alderman or alderwoman. It should be 2% of the registered voters in that particular ward. Right? It wouldn't really make 2% of citywide voters to run as an independent candidate for alderman. And I don't know, do we have any rulings on that? I know this was subject to the lawsuit.
We did. So 2 years ago, for an aldermanic seat, someone running as independent, we required 2% of the registered voters citywide, which we'd never done before, but the issue was raised, and so our lawyer looked at it and said, well, the language of the code doesn't provide an exception for an aldermanic race. So we said 2%, which was a much higher number, and so that particular candidate, her lawyer filed a lawsuit, and it never went to court, but we sort of reconsidered our position and thought this has been consistent with prior practice, but it would be nice to clean it up now with the 2019 municipal elections on the horizon. That's why it was nice of the committee and the board to take it up now, because we can get it passed before November 26th, when filing opens for the spring elections. Then we take care of things like receiving the fee if somebody wants to run as independent, sample ballots and the rest of that. And it does get confusing, so for example, Alderwoman Howard, if you were the first to file, but someone gets a lower number than you on the first day, you're still gonna be listed first on the real ballot, but on the sample ballot that we're required to mail out, we would list the candidates alphabetically, because that's what the
Yeah.
municipal
okay,
code
I
requires.
got it.
And then we always explain that in the cover letter, but invariably a candidate will say, wait a minute, I was the first to file. Yes, I know you were, but for this sample ballot, the one that would appear on our website would be correct, but the one that we have to mail out to the candidates and the chair of the central committee, that one has to list it alphabetically. It just creates, and state law requires, right.
And then the last bill, 147, simply changes the date to withdraw as a candidate from 40 days to 50 days. Absentee voting actually starts 42 days prior to the election, so we wanted to give them a little buffer. If you do withdraw, you know, that can cause ballots to have to be reprinted and everything else. So to give them, the election board, just a little bit of a buffer on updating their ballots and everything else. So 50 days prior to the election if you want to withdraw for a municipal race.
Okay, but absentee voting starts, 42 days.
Right. So what's been happening is, so we start absentee voting 42 days before the election. Now, it's a practical matter in a it works fine for a primary. In a general, we only have 4 weeks to start with. But by law, we're supposed to open absentee balloting 6 weeks before the election. If a candidate can withdraw as late as 40 days before the election, we've had situations where people come in to vote an absentee ballot on the first day, and we have to advise them potentially, now we're not predicting somebody will, but we've had the situation once or twice where a candidate has in fact withdrawn, and someone may have already voted for them. This just clarifies, and it doesn't, if someone files for office, they ought to know if they're going to withdraw, I would think.
Yeah,
And
by
so
50 days.
filing closes 60 days before the election, so that gives a candidate who might be waffling 10 days where they could say, I'm not so sure I want to do this, and they can drop out, and it wouldn't affect the absentee voting.
Or the ballots
Or the-
that
yes,
have to be
correct.
reprinted.
Okay, so thank you for going through all of those. I think at this point, we'll take questions one at a time. We'll start with Board Bill 144. As Alderman Coatar said, Board Bill 144 clarifies how payment is submitted when one files for office. So I don't have any questions. Alderman Kennedy? Alderman Boyd?
Sure, I have a curious question. Gary, our code says that all your taxes must be paid,
Correct.
you know, or to be eligible to file, right? But there have been times where people signed up and their taxes were not paid, and then they were given time to go and pay it, which I think is unfair. You know, I think if you sign a declaration saying that, you know, you don't owe any taxes, blah, 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 then you should be automatically disqualified, because you basically swear, if I remember correctly on filing, that all the information is true and correct.
That's true. So there are actually two affidavits that a candidate signs. One is for the state of Missouri that says, in essence, my taxes are paid, and if the position for which I'm running is one that requires a bond, I'm bondable. And then the city one essentially says the same thing. It says my taxes are paid, and if I have any fees or penalties due to the MEC, those are taken care of. Now, those are separate from this here. That's
Okay.
entirely different. So the declaration says I'm running for office and here's my fee. These two affidavits both say that my taxes are paid, but both the one for the state, which is covered by state statute, and the one for the city, which is covered by a city ordinance, contain a mechanism that if there's a question about a candidate's taxes, then in the case of the state, the Department of Revenue notifies the candidate and gives them 30 days to correct the problem. The city ordinance says we then notify the candidate, and they have 7 days to correct the problem. So I can appreciate the fact, if you sign an affidavit, you should know if your taxes are paid. But the city's own ordinance says that if a question is raised, then we notify the candidate, and the candidate then has 7 days to either prove that they have paid, or in fact go pay
Right.
their taxes and bring.
But what happens when you don't find this out until 2 weeks before Election Day? Absentee ballots are out, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
They still get 7 days to cure?
Well, if it's 7 days before the election, the ballots are printed. And
Right.
it's too late to take the candidate
Yeah,
off the
but how are
ballot.
they, but technically they're not eligible.
Well, but on the city's own ordinance,
Mhm.
there's a mechanism where the candidate gets notified. After a certain date, ballots are printed, we can't change that. And it would be up to another candidate to file a lawsuit against.
Challenge your
the-
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
court would then have to issue an order. Now, they couldn't tell us to take it off the ballot.
Right.
They could tell us post signs and don't count the votes for
Okay.
that candidate.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, that clears that up.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Alderman Howard.
Just to clarify, and I think we've pretty well on 145,
What we're on
we're
one-
just doing 144,
Right.
no questions, I'm sorry.
Okay. Alderwoman Hubbard.
No question.
Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions, okay, so, like say, okay, so I'm a, registered Democrat, I file as a Democrat, so mine goes to the Democratic Central Committee. If you're a Republican, there's a Republican Central Committee, is there an independent?
No.
Where does it go?
Well-
They don't
well,
technically,
They don't file in the primary, right? So
Right.
independent, they have to go gather the signatures.
Right.
Yeah, but like the Green Party has
so
a
they have
central
no
committee.
filing fee,
Well, they do.
Okay,
So
where
their
does it-
filing fee goes, they have to go to the treasurer's office
okay,
and pay their filing fee and bring us a receipt at the same time they file their petition.
okay.
And that's what gave rise to the question 2 years ago that was raised by an independent candidate for mayor.
Yes.
She had to go pay her fee in advance to the treasurer and bring us a receipt. How come the other candidates weren't bringing us a receipt from the treasurer of the central committee? And if you read the ordinance the way it currently reads, that's probably a fair question. So this just, now, state law does provide that for county offices and other offices, the election authority can accept the fee and then turn around and hand it off to the treasurer. We had been doing that for years as a courtesy. This would simply give us the authority to do that. Otherwise, Jesse has to sit down there on the first day and collect the fees. And we always turn the fees over.
Right,
It's just that this clarifies that we have the right to, more importantly, that the candidate has the opportunity to give us the fee when they file their declaration papers. But it's not payable to us, it's payable to the central committee.
thank you, no more questions.
Okay, Alderwoman Navarro.
No questions on 144.
Okay, I move we,
I move that we pass Board Bill 144 with a do pass recommendation.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy? Alderman Boyd?
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard?
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard?
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy?
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy?
Aye.
Alderwoman Navarro?
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook? Alderman Vaquero? We have 7 aye votes.
Okay. Board Bill 144 passes out of committee with a do pass recommendation. Before us now is Board Bill 145. This is the bill that deals with the order in which candidates are shown on sample ballots. Questions from committee members? Alderman Kennedy?
No question.
Alderman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderwoman Howard?
So now, all of the ballots that are distributed will be consistent, the order of the candidates?
Right.
Is that what-
The real ballot has always been in the order of filing, and the sample ballot that we put on the website is consistent with the real ballot. But the ordinance requires that we mail out to candidates and to committee chairs what's called a sample ballot in the ordinance, in which the candidates are listed alphabetically, even though the real ballot will list them in the order in which they filed. And so we explain that in a cover letter.
Right.
But you can sort of appreciate if you're thinking you're gonna be first on the ballot, which you really are. But then you get a sample ballot from us that says, no, Gary Stoff, even though he filed after you on day one. Well, his name comes before, well, it doesn't Howard, but the point is, that somebody else's name appears before yours because alphabetically,
That's
their name
the
comes
way it is.
first.
Okay. Okay, no more questions. Understood.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
No questions.
Alderwoman Murphy,
No questions.
Alderwoman Navarro.
No questions.
I guess I have one question. So we only, these sample ballots that the Board of Elections produces only go to a few specific people?
They go to the candidates, the committee chairs, and as a courtesy, we send them out to all the elected officials.
Okay.
And so, I mean, we do get some phone calls, typically from a candidate who thought they were going to be listed first, which they really are on the real ballot, but on the sample ballot, maybe they're listed second or third.
And this was probably an important thing prior to the internet, and you know, this was maybe the first place that you would see the sample ballot all put together.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
And it's consistent with state law, which says your sample, but same procedure, we're required to send out a sample ballot, but candidates are listed in the order in which they actually filed.
Okay.
But your sample ballot on your website always lists the candidates as the order they'll appear on the ballot,
Correct, yes.
because this doesn't speak to the website.
Right.
Right. Okay, well, I move we pass Board Bill 145 with a due pass recommendation.
Second. Previous row.
Been moved and seconded. There has been a request for previous roll. Is there any objection to previous roll? Hearing none, Board Bill 145 passes with a due pass recommendation. Before us now is Board Bill 146, committee substitute. And this is the bill that clarifies the number of signatures that independent candidates need, independent candidates for aldermen specifically need to be listed on the ballot.
And Chairman, just to be clear, I believe we have to, probably you guys have to vote to
I was gonna
place
say.
146 CS in front of you.
There's always a procedural question
Always.
on that.
I don't know if you do or not.
That's why Mr. Gali is here.
We have to
Just
put it
do
before,
it.
Mr. Chairman.
All right.
And I move that Board Bill 146 committee substitute be placed before the committee for consideration.
Second.
Previous row.
Here, there's been a request
Now it's here.
for previous roll. Hearing no objection. Board Bill 146 committee sub is before the committee. All right, well, we can take questions from committee members. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The difference is only the addition of an independent?
That's right. You know, so and this was also an issue in that same when was that? The
2 years ago.
Municipal election in 2017.
Yeah.
So I guess in the city code, we refer to nonpartisan candidates, but then there's a whole section in state law about independent candidates, which is what a really nonpartisan candidate would be. So this is just basically adding the word independent and then clarifying that 2% threshold, that it's for the office in which you seek, so your ward, if you're an independent running for alderman.
That's all right, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Boyd.
Just want to make clear, so if you're running for a citywide seat, does this speak to if you're running for a citywide seat?
It does, the way the ordinance reads right now is to run as an independent or a nonpartisan candidate, you need 2% of the registered voters in the city. And it doesn't distinguish between a citywide office and an aldermanic seat.
Okay.
Now, we always interpreted if someone's running as an independent for alderman, it was only 2% of the registered voters in that ward, which is consistent with the language in the charter dealing with recall. But we had the issue arise again 2 years ago regarding an aldermanic seat, because we took the position that the language of the ordinance doesn't carve out an exception for aldermanic independence. And so we were about to require independent candidates for alderman or alderwoman to have 2% of the registered voters citywide.
So-
Go ahead.
So this just carves that out. Put
That's
this
right.
in the code. The others remain the same. If you're
Exactly
running for
right.
comptroller or mayor or anything like that, it's still 2% citywide.
Yes.
Gotcha. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderwoman Howard.
Now, that 2% is of the last voter turnout, is that,
It's 2% of the entire votes cast in the preceding election for mayor.
okay.
So if you're running for alderman in a ward, it would be 2% of whatever the votes cast for mayor in that ward. If
Oh,
it's
okay.
citywide, it'd be 2% of the votes
So it
cast
isn't the
citywide.
past aldermanic election?
No, it's the mayoral election.
Okay.
And that's
Alright.
consistent, like if there's vacancies for like state rep races and
Right.
stuff, they always use 2%, and that's not 2%, it's a different percentage.
The
But it's of the governors, the results from the
Right,
governor's
Right,
race.
right.
Okay. Which makes sense. Otherwise, it could be a very small.
It could be a very small number.
Okay. No further questions.
Okay, Alderwoman Hubbard.
No questions.
Alderwoman Murphy?
Okay, just to clarify, so it's 2% of the entire votes cast, not registered voters. So
Votes
it doesn't
cast.
matter how many registered voters you have, it's how many of those registered voters actually voted.
Correct.
Okay, so that could be very small, I get you. Okay.
But you're correct, but for someone running for alderman, if they needed to use there as their base 2% of all the voters in the city, as opposed to just 2%.
No.
Yeah.
Of the ward, but it's not registered voters in the ward, it's just voters that actually cast a ballot.
ballot.
So
Correct.
there's a big difference.
Yes, it could, yeah, it'll be a much lower number.
Yes, okay. Just wanted to clarify, no more questions.
Alderwoman Navarro.
Thank you. I do have two questions. One, so playing this out, how does this work every 10 years after we do redistricting? It would be based on the ward boundaries at the time of the last mayoral election, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the other question I have is about, so the people who are signing the petition to get somebody on the ballot, it says they're declaring that they have not aided and will not aid someone and another candidate in a nomination for an elected city office. So does that mean if I sign a petition to get an independent candidate on the ballot, I cannot sign another petition for a
Right.
different independent candidate, correct?
For the same office.
For the same
Right.
office, right?
And that's, the code currently provides that if someone signs a petition for someone to run as an independent or a nonpartisan, they are saying they will not support any other candidate, period. So theoretically, we have no way to enforce that.
Right.
But theoretically, if an independent is running for aldermanic person, and I would sign their petition, I would be saying, I will not work for or support any other candidate, period. Mayor, comptroller, and this clarifies that it's only, they
For
would
that
not,
office.
for that particular office.
Okay, because this says that you won't aid in the nomination of any other candidate.
Right.
It doesn't say that you won't aid them in the actual
Right,
election.
yeah, but that means you won't sign somebody else's
Right,
petition.
you won't sign somebody else's petition.
Yes.
But you'll see the old language before was less clear. It's the strike-through stuff below. It will not aid and will not be aided in the nomination of any candidate for an elective office. So that was any city office.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I'm just thinking that there are times when we have multiple independent candidates on the ballot, and I imagine that there are people signing multiple petitions. Do we go back and look and say, strike some of those because somebody, I mean, my impression is when they come to the door and ask, they don't tell you, oh, if you sign this one, you're committed to nominating only this independent candidate and not anybody else. What's the process?
Well, there isn't, well, now, the petition form that the individual signs says that.
Sure.
Now, whether they in fact read the whole thing, but frankly, there's no effective way to enforce that. We were just trying to clarify, the main goal from our perspective was to carve out that the 2% requirement for an aldermanic office referred to the ward as opposed to the entire. And that sort of clarified the affidavit form that you're not gonna actively work for the nomination of another candidate for the same office. We have no way to police that.
Okay, I was just looking for clarification, understanding how this
Yeah.
is supposed to
It's based on an
work.
honor system, assuming there is some honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a good question.
No further
Okay,
questions.
okay. I guess I have a question. I just want to walk through this. So, for a citywide election, let's say, doesn't matter, citywide election, it's 2% of the ballots cast at the last election is the threshold.
For mayor,
For mayor.
For mayor.
yes.
But for aldermen, it's 2% of registered voters.
No, it's 2% of ballots cast for mayor in that ward.
Right.
That is not,
Is that not clear?
Yeah, it says cast.
no, it says I'm gonna read it, and provided further
Oh.
that the petition
Yeah.
for a nonpartisan or independent candidate for alderman
See,
need to be
that was
signed
my
by only
question.
2% of the registered voters in that particular ward
Correct.
At the time of the
Right.
election, which is
Right.
different than what,
Cast.
Because we
That's what I
Oh,
said.
that is
That's-
different. My
That's
apologies.
my point. I said, is it cast or registered?
Registered.
Well, then we gotta
Well-
fix that.
well, no, this
No,
says
no,
registered.
Yeah.
No, the ordinance.
One at a
current-
time, please.
All right, so the ordinance currently requires 2% of the registered voters in the last mayoral. And right now, that applies both to citywide office and even aldermanic office, even though we've never interpreted that way. But because the issue arose and a lawsuit was filed 2 years ago, we thought it would be a good idea to clarify. So if someone's running for a citywide office, it's 2% of the registered voters in the city of St. Louis as of the last mayoral. If it's an aldermanic person, it's 2% of the registered voters in that ward as of the last mayoral election.
All right, my point though is that's not what this bill
I'm
says.
sorry.
Right, yeah, that's not.
So
line
That was my
seven.
point. It doesn't say that.
Yeah,
I
that's not
understand that's what
necessarily.
you wanted to
Right.
say, but that's not.
Candidates for an elective office may be nominated by a petition signed by registered voters of the
The
city.
seven-
Anyone at
seven
2% of the
is
entire.
10.
Oh, the
Yeah, so
votes
this
cast.
is not consistent. So this one
Right.
needs to be tweaked. And I misspoke, Alderwoman from the 13th, I apologize.
It should be consistent with the requirement
Previous.
for a citywide office. And that's what it should be.
So you
Yeah,
want
I
it,
did.
But is there
One at-
registered voters or votes cast?
one at a time.
I think registered voters probably makes more, 2% of the registered voters at the time of that mayoral race.
Yeah.
That'd be a higher threshold, right?
Right.
Because not everybody's gonna vote in the mayoral race, but there's gonna be more registered voters than votes cast.
All right.
Yeah.
The one thing I would, all right. The votes cast is very clear though, because you can look up votes cast in the last election and calculate that.
Right.
The number of registered voters, I mean, I guess the number of registered voters is also out there, but that may not be as.
That's a harder number to ascertain.
Well,
accessible.
no,
Not in the ward.
no. The number is ascertainable because it's always keyed to the last mayoral election. But let me read for you. So 2.08330 for a nonpartisan candidate.
Are you reading from the?
I'm reading from the actual city code.
From today's city code as it is
So
today.
it says nonpartisan candidates may be nominated by certificate by registered voters of the city to a number equal to 2% of the entire vote cast at the last preceding election of a mayor. So as you read that, the way it currently says, there'd be no exception for an aldermanic independent. They would still have to have 2% of the entire vote cast for mayor at the last preceding election citywide. What we were trying to clarify was that for an independent candidate for an aldermanic seat, the 2% would be the votes cast for mayor, but just in that ward as of the last mayoral, not registered voters, 2% of the votes cast.
Okay,
The idea was to be consistent.
Yeah, but we
I
did.
get that.
so
right.
that's fine. So I ran as an independent, and that is how it was applied to me at the time in 2011. It was 2% of the votes that were cast within the 24th ward at the prior mayoral election. That's the number of signatures I needed to get on the ballot. And it is a fairly low threshold in most cases, especially because it's the general election, not,
Primary.
yeah, not the primary.
And frankly, from our perspective, we wouldn't care if the committee and the board increased the threshold. We were just trying to distinguish between
Right.
aldermanic independent.
What,
And as written, it would be 2% of registered voters.
right, so my point here is that it will be confusing if we have a standard for citywide offices that is votes cast, and we have a standard for aldermen
That are registered.
that is registered voters. So, I don't know which the right one is, but I would surmise we should have probably the same standard for each category of election. And right now,
It's
within
different.
the committee substitute, we have two different standards. So I would suggest somebody decide what the right standard is and fix it before we advance.
It's 146. I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got 19 minutes. Do you want to try to do this?
Do we, I would say, does the legislation committee want to decide? I don't think, do you care if it's?
No, we don't care. I was just trying to carve out, distinguish the citywide from the aldermanic
All right,
independent.
so what I would suggest, because what the code says right now is ballots cast, I would suggest we not, on a whim, change that, because we've had decades of history with ballots cast to registered voters, because that might be, we're raising the, if we do that, we're raising the threshold to get on the ballot.
Correct.
I don't necessarily think we, today, want to say it's going to be harder to get on the ballot going forward.
I would agree with your logic there.
So I would say we stick with ballots cast for citywide and for,
So it should say, so lines, between line 5 and 6 on page 2, we need to mirror this language. 2% of the entire votes cast.
In
of
that
the
particular, well,
entire votes cast.
or mayor, or in the
That
last
part
preceding
is-
election.
But
registered voters.
At the last preceding election,
Yeah.
So it
there
should
be
say
ballots.
voters cast,
In that,
ballots cast.
actually, just change registered voters.
Yeah, to ballots cast. I
Right.
think that's all we gotta
of
do.
the votes cast for mayor in that particular ward.
Right. Instead
It
of
already says
registered
for mayor.
voters
All you gotta do is change registered voters to ballots cast.
to ballots cast. That's all you gotta do.
All right.
If we're gonna keep it the same, you know.
Words changed to 2 words.
That's
Green
what I was
Navarro.
trying to get.
No, guy, and I apologize for that, guys, we should have caught that, that makes more sense, that's clearer.
In a war.
That's why we do this.
That's right, that's why we have committee hearings.
okay, our clerk is gonna prepare an amendment. We're going to briefly set aside Board Bill 146, committee sub. We're gonna move on to Board Bill 147.
I move we put Board Bill 147 before us.
We don't have to,
We don't need
we don't have to go
to
do that. Board Bill
It was only a
147
committee sub.
is before us.
Oh, the committee sub, okay.
So Board Bill 147 is before us.
This is 40 to 50 days.
This changes the date at which point candidates can withdraw from the ballot
And get their name removed.
and get their name, right, get their name removed. I'm going to very slowly go through and ask if there are any questions from the committee. Alderman Kennedy, are there any questions?
No way.
Said very slowly.
That was good. Well done. Alderman Boyd.
Sure, I'll eat some time. 40 to 50 days. Now, there is an opportunity for people to go to court and pull their name off after that time expires, right?
If the ballot has not been printed,
Mhm.
but if the ballot has been printed, they'd have to go to court, because we can't do that unilaterally.
Mhm.
If the ballot has been printed, I don't think a judge would even order us to change the ballot.
So they can still go to court after the 50 days has expired, but they'll remain on the ballot unless the ballot has not been printed.
Right.
Okay, which has happened before. I know I've been the independent candidate, I've withdrawn my name. Just, most people don't remember. You know, it's been so long ago. In 2002, I ran as an independent candidate, and I had 2% of the registered voters. I needed like 180-some signatures, I remember. And then the first citywide office I ever ran for was Recorder of Deeds. And people don't remember. Anybody remember that?
I don't remember
I
that.
did. I was running against Sharon Carpenter. I remember my first appearance at the 28th Ward at this place on Skinker called John's or something like that, I think it was. And then I withdrew after I found out that Kenneth Jones was taking a job with the mayor. I was doing a happy dance. And I said, okay, just go ahead and withdraw from this race and run a race that's more manageable. So that's how I ended up being an independent candidate.
I get you.
So, yeah, yeah. First time Sharon Carpenter had a competition in a long time.
Method of the madness.
Right, so,
And what
Yeah.
happened at that meeting at John's, Alderman Boyd?
oh, man, I blew him away. I mean, I was young and fresh and talking about technology and I was gonna do some great things as Recorder of Deeds, but I thought being alderman would probably be more impactful and a better use of my time, and it worked out for the better. See, God is good, you know? He has a way of moving you in a certain
where you
direction
should
to
be,
place you
yeah.
where you're supposed to be at the exact time, like this committee hearing.
I'm glad we're all here
Amen.
right now.
So I'm happy to support 50 days over 40 days. That's 10 extra days. And the Board of Election is asking for it, and they do really good work over there. I know Gary Starr has been handling business for like 40 years now, Gary?
17?
17?
Well, as a- in
It
that
only
position-
seems like 40.
You've been with the city though for a long time. Haven't you? More than 17?
No.
Oh, you've been just at the Board of Election? Okay. So you were fairly new then when I came on board.
I previously served on the board for
Okay.
4 years back in 89 to 92.
Okay.
Board of Aldermen.
And so another piece
No,
of
the
history,
Board of Election Commissioners.
using that 2% threshold, I think, and the recall is 2% as well, isn't it?
Recall's higher, no, it's
Is it
20,
higher?
25.
20%, that's right. I actually participated in that as well. I was part of a recall initiative to recall Kenneth Jones at that time in 2002. So using the Board of Elections policy and procedures to have my way has been an inspiration to me. It has given me to have a very broad view of politics and voter registration and how we can,
I understand.
Will the
There was a
Aldermen
period in the
defer for
early
questions?
2000s when there were quite a few recalls, weren't there? Alderman?
in the year, yeah, let's see, Peggy Ryan, no, Melinda Long was recalled. Peggy Ryan was recalled
Yeah.
too, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Why were voters so angry back then?
The voters were angry
That's
because
the
they felt that
eternal
they were
question.
underrepresented and they had just had enough. And that's what this electoral process is all about. When you're tired and fed up, you go vote. And if you think you voted for the wrong person, you can get a do-over if you can recall that person.
It's a lot of work
Yeah.
to make that recall.
And people think just because you successful on having them recall that it's over, it's not.
Triggers an election.
It triggers an election, and they have a right to, Gary, to run as an independent, is that right?
Say it again.
If you recall an alderperson, say you
Yes.
recall a Democratic alderperson, that person can just file as an independent in a special election?
Well, actually, that person can, yes. I mean, that person can actually file for the nomination. So what happens, if, first you have a vote on the recall, should Gary Stoff be recalled?
Mhm.
Yes or no? If the answer is yes, that office is vacated.
Mhm.
Now we have a new election, and the parties designate their candidate.
Ah.
But, and I think Tom Bauer actually ran, he was recalled,
Uh-huh.
and then ran as an independent in the subsequent election, didn't win that either.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
So-
here's our amendments.
Man, this has been a great committee hearing.
This has been so educational.
Just some civic lessons
agree,
going on
Alderman.
here.
I should come over more often.
All right, I'm going to remind us that we are still on Board Bill 147.
Right.
Oh,
Still before us. We are now to Alderwoman Howard for any questions. On
I have no
147.
questions. Do we have to vote to adopt these amendments?
No, this
Board
is
Bill
another
147.
bill. We're on 147.
Oh, we're on 147, okay.
Uh,
No questions.
Alderwoman Hubbard, are there any
No
questions?
questions. I get confused.
Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions.
Alderwoman Navarro.
No questions.
Okay, that brings it back to me. I don't have any questions on 147, so I make a motion, we pass Board Bill 147 with a do pass recommendation.
Second.
Previous roll.
So motion and a second, there's been a request
Now
for
we're back.
previous roll. Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 147 passes. Now before us again is Board Bill 146, Committee Substitute. An amendment to Board Bill 146, Committee Substitute, has been passed around. I'm going to take a moment to let us all read the amendment.
Hold on a second. The entire vote's cast. Last preceding election of mayor.
In that particular ward.
Well, it still needs to say in that particular ward, though. Did we remove that language?
I don't think so. But I think you have to state it.
Alright, 6.
I think we need to add
In that particular ward.
in that
yeah.
particular ward, right? Because it got removed.
Sure then.
All right,
Oh.
we
Yeah.
can,
Write that into our amendment?
yeah, and I'm gonna read the whole thing out, so we're all clear on what it is, all right? So, the amendment is going to say, To amend said board bill, page 2, line 6 to page 2, line 6 as follows. Beginning on page 2, line 6, strike out the words, "the registered voters in that particular ward at the time of said mayoral election," and insert in lieu thereof to read in the words and figures as follows. The entire vote cast in that particular ward at the last preceding election of a mayor.
That works.
Shouldn't be ballots cast?
Entire vote.
What is it,
Votes
like?
ca- It says vote
Be
cast.
consistent?
It says vote cast in the first clause,
Yeah.
it's vote cast.
You should just mirror that language.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't,
Was it- I
yeah.
thought we
Is
were
it
doing
vote
two
cast or
words.
ballot?
It should be
Right.
2%
of ballot
of the
votes
entire vote cast
in that I mean, we didn't need to change, I mean, all we needed to change.
in that
was
particular
registered
ward
voters.
at the last
And that's
preceding
all that
election of the mayor.
Right, we could have
Only
just
thing we
changed the
took-
two, we
that's
could
what
have
we
just
said.
changed
Registered
these
voters
two
to
words.
ballot
I don't know why we
cast.
To our
did.
entire
Well, I think
vote
that's
cast,
Ballots
whatever.
cast in that, and then it
That's all.
reads in that
Other word,
particular ward at the time of
voted.
the mayor's election.
Yeah, that's all we need.
I think with those corrections are
That
Okay.
does-
there.
Okay.
Does everybody have a consistent copy before
I
them?
think we,
That reads the entire vote cast in that particular ward at the last preceding election of a mayor.
right.
Um, So we did questions on 146 committee substitute. I make a motion, we adopt Amendment 1 to Board Bill 146 committee substitute.
Second.
Read the roll.
Been a motion and a second. There's been a request for previous roll. Hearing no objection, Amendment 1 to Board Bill 146 committee substitute is adopted. Before us now is Board Bill 146 committee substitute
As it is.
as amended. And I'm gonna read this particular line one more time.
Do that, that's
As
a
it is
good idea.
amended. So on page 2, line 6 now reads, I'm gonna read the 3 lines. And provided further that the petition for a nonpartisan or independent candidate for alderman or alderwoman need be signed by only 2% of the entire vote cast in that particular ward at the last preceding election of a mayor. That's lines 4 through 6. Okay,
I think that's clear.
we're clear on that. I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 146, committee substitute, as amended with a do pass recommendation.
Second.
Read the roll.
There's been a motion and a second. There's been a request for previous roll. Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 146, committee substitute, as amended, passes.
There you go.
Thank you, everyone. The legislation committee is adjourned.